Okay, good evening, everybody. Welcome back after Pesach. I hope everybody had a great Pesach. And if you remember, we were Zoicher, we merited, Baruch Hashem, to finish off the first half of Mesillat Yesharim. And what we're planning to do now is to start with some trepidation, the second half. And I say with some trepidation because really the two halves of Mesillat Yesharim divided into what's called tzidkus, which loosely translated means righteousness, and the second half is something which is called chasidus, which is variously translated as saintliness. It's not, when we say chasidus, it's not the movement started by the Baal Shem Tov. They took the name chasidus from the Chasidim Arishonim, the early Chasidim in the time of the Gemara of Chazal. Basically the idea is that the tzaddik is somebody who does everything that says in the Shulchan Aruch. Somebody who keeps all the mitzvahs, everything that it says. A chassid, in the term and the way we're using the term now, is somebody who goes beyond, as they say in English, the letter of the law, or as we say in Lashon HaKodesh, who goes lifnai mishur sadin, within the boundaries that are set by Chazal. And the reason why I approach it with some trepidation is that halavai, we should be all, speaking about myself now, that we should be able to fulfill what it says in the first half of this book. And I'm sure the question's been asked, and we could certainly ask it. Okay, hang on a second. You think we've got the first half of the book, tzidkus, and all what a tzaddik has to do and fulfill everything it does in Shulchan Aruch. I mean, hello, isn't this reaching for the stars? Isn't this a little bit like, what do they say nowadays, beyond our pay grade? The answer is, and I said the answer before, but I think it's worth repeating now as we are about to start, B'ezrat Hashem, the section of Chasidus, is that the two answers really. The first answer is that it's true. Halavai, we should fulfill everything it says in the first half of the book. But the mere knowledge that there is something beyond that in itself makes a person a different person. A person, when he has a vista of something which is beyond something which he will ever achieve, nevertheless that reorients him, that changes who he is, that changes the way he looks at what he's doing now. That's one answer. The mere fact that we understand, even though we will never reach those levels ever, the mere fact that we are aware of these levels that we're going to be learning now for the rest of the book, Mesillat Yesharim, makes a person a different person. The second answer is, it's true. I don't know, talking about myself, I doubt very much whether I will be able to, halavai, I should fulfill the first half of the book. Maybe there are people in this generation who do, probably there are, and maybe those people will be able to reach above that level. But one thing is for sure, that it is possible, even for somebody who's on the level of not having yet fulfilled in all its details the level of tzidkus, as we're saying, righteousness, the lower level. Could be that once in your life, or maybe a couple of times in life, you will actually be able to reach above what is naturally your level, reach above and touch that level which is in the level of chasidus, in the level which is above. And it's worth for that alone to have read and to understand about those levels. Let's talk a little bit about the difference between a tzaddik and a chassid. Noach ish tzaddik b'dorosov. Noach was called a tzaddik in his generation. And Avram is the pillar of chesed. Chesed la'Avraham. Chesed, the level of chasidus, which comes from the word chesed, that is the level of Avram Avinu. The level of a Noach was in the teva, with all of these animals which he had to look after. He was in the ark with all of these animals. And, of course, he did his job. But Noach, on the level of tzidkus, of righteousness, would understand that if there was an automatic machine that could feed and clean all the animals in the teva, in the ark, that would be fine, as long as the job gets done. Avram Avinu is on a different level. Avram Avinu, we see 3 days after the Brit Milah, after he brought himself into the covenant of Avram Avinu. He gave himself a Brit Milah, the third day, which is the most painful day. HaKadosh Baruch Hu brought Avram Avinu these Arabs, these wanderers, these nomads, so that he could fulfill the mitzvah of hachnosis orchim. In other words, the fact that Avraham Avinu could not do the mitzvah in itself was more painful to him than the fact of his physical discomfort from the bris milah. In other words, Noach in that situation would probably say, look, it's fine, there are plenty of other people who can do this mitzvah of hachnosis orchim, that's fine, as long as they get taken care of. For Avraham Avinu, it's not a question of this is getting taken care of. The fact is that I want to do this, I want to do the chesed. It's not that the job has to be done, and as provided it gets done, that's fine. No, if I can't do the job, that pains me, and it pains me more than the considerable physical pain of the third day after bris milah. That is the difference between a tzaddik and a chassid. Anyway, with that introduction, I guess with that caveat in mind as well, we'll start. Bir midasa precious. The first level of what's called chassidus is called precious, which literally means separation. And V'sireh shekol ma'asher beirona. I think what I'll do is I'll do a running translation from the Hebrew in English. Everything we've explained to up till now. By the way, if you want to follow along, it's Perek Yud Gimel, Perek 13. The explanation of the midah of precious, and that's the first level of what's called chassidus, which means separating yourself from what we'll see. Everything that we said up till now is, as we said before, what a person needs to do to be a tzaddik. And from now on onward, we're talking about a chassid. Shiur chassid. And you will find, this is his first point, that precious separation in chassidus is the equivalent of zehirus with zrizus. In other words, we learned, remember the beginning of the book with this idea of zehirus, which means basically carefulness not to transgress the negative mitzvahs. So precious is this higher level, is like the secondary level after a person has become a zoya. He's become watchful, he doesn't break the mitzvahs, lo sa'aseh. And together with zrizus, which is alacrity to do the positive mitzvahs. So the level of precious is, so to speak, the equivalent level, the equivalent idea, but on a higher level. Shezeh b'sur meira v'zeh b'asei tov, because as we said before, watchfulness, carefulness, zehirus is sur meira, turning aside from doing evil, and zrizus, alacrity, is doing good. Hine klala haprecious hu, she'omru zal, it says in the Yevamos, kadesh atzmecha b'mutaloch. Chazal teaches, kadesh atzmecha, sanctify yourself b'mutaloch, in that which is permitted to you. Meaning that which is really the definition of the word precious itself, separation. What does it mean to separate? It means separate yourself from those things which are already mutter to you. I thought of an idea actually. Nowadays, I bought myself an electric car, and I must say, it's a great car. It has this amazing amount of stuff in it that, it tells you if you take your hands off the wheel, it'll still, the car will basically steer itself. It doesn't like you doing that though. It gives you flashes of warning, please put your hands back on the wheel. But it has this thing which you can set, which is how far the car, when it's on autopilot, basically you set a speed, and it'll keep that speed, and if somebody cuts in front of you, it'll brake, etc., etc. But it allows you to set how far back you want to be from that car in front of you. So I was thinking, there are basically 3 levels we're talking about here. He's going to discuss this in a moment. There's the level of chas v'chalila, you smash into the back of the car in front of you. That's called a nissa d'oraisa. There's a level where you've got your 2 green bars there, which tells you it'll keep you however many meters back, or whatever it is, 10 meters back, probably not as much as that. And then you've got the 3 bars, and that's precious. That's the one that keeps you way back. The whole idea of precious is to give yourself, I guess what they call nowadays, wiggle room. Room that you're not going to get yourself into trouble. Chazal came along and they made a gezerah, they made a decree to make sure, a lot of their decrees were to not make sure people didn't transgress the mitzvah d'oraisa. somebody who is a porish, somebody who separates himself, is somebody who draws the line. He takes what's mutter al pi din, even according to the Rabbanon, and he says, no, I'm not going to go that far. And we'll see why that is. He doesn't want to stay. Doesn't want to get any way at all towards what might be even an infringement of a rabbinic mitzvah. Maybe it's worth just yeah.
So we know that Chazal can enact takana to make this distancing, this what you said precious, and that it's accepted because they're the Gadol Hador. But can an individual person on his own just decide to make personal takanas on himself?
Okay, it's a very good question. The question is that Chazal made already takanas for us as to how far back, so to speak, we have to be from the Issa D'Oraisa, the Torah prohibition. Does an individual person, have the right to be able to set the boundary even further back? And the answer is yes, he does. Now, with a certain qualification. The Mesillat Yesharim is going to discuss this. There's a kind of separation, a kind of precious, which is logical and which is advisable, and in certain cases, which is necessary. And on the other hand, there's a certain kind of precious which is illogical and obsessive. And he draws distinction between the two. The question, which of course follows on from your question, is if it's advisable to do it, so why don't Chazal make that the baseline, so to speak, of the Rabbanon? The answer is that Chazal only decreed what they understood most people can do. If you try and set the bar too high, it means that when people say, "We'll just go forget this. This is I can't do this," and give up completely. But for somebody who should. That's really the general principle, and you'll see how he works this out.
So that's the qualification: is if you have that ability.
If you can, you should. But of course, a person has to be honest with himself. I think that. This is something that when people sometimes come to Or Sameach, that they get carried away. And it can be, they call it in Yiddish, chapping malachim, grabbing onto angels. And they want to do everything. And, in my day when the people used to wear long hair, so, one day you'd have this guy with hair down here, and the next day, the only part of his hair which would be down here, the part where his fingers were. And, it's always, all spiritual growth can only be incremental. A person should be highly suspicious of any kind of leap, because after a leap usually becomes an equally sudden fall, and then it's even worse because a person loses all of the the enthusiasm and so it's better to go slowly. A person should keep going up. A person has to go up. Vilna Gaon, I think he didn't use quite this analogy, but if one could use the analogy of an escalator, life is like an escalator which basically goes down. The nature of the physical world is, as we're going to see, is something which draws a person to be more physical, draws him to his lower self. And that's life. If a person walks, he'll stand still. The only way he can go up is to run. The only way you can really move against your nature, your physical nature, is to be constantly trying to go up. Even if you only walk, if you don't walk, you'll go down. So a person, in order even to stay where he is, has to constantly be making an effort. Okay, there's maybe one other parenthetical thing, and a beautiful mashal I once heard from Rav Leff about the whole idea of Gezerah. Gezerah is the Rabbanon, this idea of Chazal. So sometimes when a person sees what Chazal are goyzer to our minds, it seems to be rather extreme. For example, one of the reasons you can't ride a horse on Shabbos is that you might ride a horse and you might come along and find a branch, and you might forget to bring your riding crop, and you'll be riding along and you'll tear off a branch from a tree to use that as a stick to goad the horse. And that is why, which seems extremely remote.
Riding is not asur.
In itself, riding is not asur. The Gezerah is because of this. And of course, to our minds, this is something which is extremely rare. But one has to remember, and the mashal goes like this: there was a village on the top of this mountain, and it was like this sort of plateau, flat plateau at the top, and every side was about 1,000 meters. This sort of sudden precipitous drop for 1,000 meters on all sides. And so one bright spark decided they should make a fence around in case people fell off the edge. Now, you're not going to make that fence right on the edge, because what happens if the fence gets broken? You're in big trouble. If you have a really serious drop in front of you, what you'll do is you'll pull that perimeter back so far that you'll say, this, even if a person breaks through that, he's got another 100 yards to go before he's going to fall off the edge of the cliff. And so similarly, with one aspect of this is a lot of what Chazal were gozer seems to us to be extreme, but that's because they understood the dire danger of, God forbid, being over on a Nissa D'Oraisa. We don't. It's difficult for us because intellectually we understand that the Torah punishes us, says that there are terrible, terrible punishments for breaking the laws of the Torah. Intellectually we understand that, but it's not something that we have a chush for, we have a feel for. It's very difficult. It's a very difficult Torah. There's no lightning striking, somebody we know, and also I think if you come from the secular world, you see people did this forever and whatever, they're still walking around, and a person has to spend a lot of time inculcating the seriousness, and this is really what a lot of what Musar is about, to take that intellectual awareness and belief and to make it something which is b'chush, which is, and so, because that's a difficult thing for us to really internalize, so Chazal made it that it will be very, very far away from ever getting anywhere close to a Nissa D'Oraisa. Another idea is that Chazal were yored ladas, go to the depth of the human psyche. And in a lot of circumstances, we think things aren't a problem, where they can be. I think I told you the story, but it's worth repeating. It's a true story. At least I think it's a true story because I heard it from the person who heard it from the person it happened to. So what's that, third hand? So second-hand stories go, that's not bad, third hand. Apparently this guy was a businessman, and he was doing business with some non-Jewish people. And they understood that, that they went to this restaurant which wasn't kosher, and they understood that he wouldn't be able to eat with them, but they ordered some wine. So he said, I'm very sorry, but I can't drink the wine. He said, well, what's the wine? There's going to be a pig in the wine. I mean, what's the problem with the wine? So he explained that there's a rabbinic decree because of a situation where at one point in time, idol worshippers would pour out wine to their gods, and therefore Chazal came along and said, whenever we don't drink wine, he didn't put it quite in these terms, obviously, with non-Jews, because of this rabbinic decree, because of the situation of where wine was used for avodah zarah, for idol worship. So they all looked at me and they come and do me a favor. So this, I don't know, somewhere in Los Angeles, Melrose or one of these places, where they have these nouvelle cuisine where they give you a knife and fork and a microscope so you can see what the food is. And this waiter kind of minces over to the table and says, oh gentlemen, I couldn't help overhear what you were saying. I just wanted to tell you that before I serve the wine, I always pour out a little wine to my gods in the kitchen. He was a new pagan. So they were there for all the faces of all these guys. So, okay, how likely is it that, but that's a story of something which happened. I agree. I don't think it happens every Monday and Thursday. But Chazal understood in their wisdom situations which could happen. And based on our other principle is bearing in mind this extreme severity of what an Issa, a Torah prohibition, is. Therefore, they were very, very, very careful to pull that fence way, way, way back from the edge of the cliff. Okay, let's carry on. So, the idea of precious, of separation, is quite literally, as we said, to separate yourself from that which is permissible to you. The intent is, as we said, that a person should never come close to an issa, to a prohibition itself. That, and this is really a new point now, anything which is possible to engender from it the creation of evil, even though right now it's not creating evil now. That's the idea of precious. Anything, it's like the third bar, so to speak, on your green bars in your car. I'm way away from the car in front of me, but you know something, I could be a little closer, therefore, if I was a little closer, then I'm already that much closer to doing something which is dangerous. As it says, that's anything that could give rise to something that could bring about evil, even though it doesn't bring evil at all right now. And for sure it's not evil in itself, this thing that I'm prohibiting on myself. Okay. So we mentioned already that there are three levels. There's the forbidden things themselves, that's the Isid D'Oraisa. There are the fences, the Sayagim, the Gzerot, that Chazal decreed to keep us away from the Torah prohibitions. And then we're talking about these herchekim, literally distances, things which distance ourselves. Where, as we say, this is left to the individual, abstaining from things that are, as we said, perfectly permitted, which are not prescribed for all Klal Yisrael, and being peirush, separating themselves from these things to be as far as possible removed from them. Okay, new topic. What gives us the right to create, so to speak, new prohibitions? Chazal say in the Talmud Yerushalmi, in the Dorim, Tes Aleph, Lo daicha masha osra Torah sha'ata ba le'asa alecha devarim acherim. It's not enough for you that the Torah osad prohibited certain things for you, that you want to come along and make more things asa. And in other words, isn't it not that Chazal, as we said before, in their great wisdom, as we described at some length, had already prohibited those things. They'd already given you these protections. And Masha hinichu leheto hu mipnei sharui. And those things that they left to be permissible because they saw that they were fit to be matter them and not to make them asa, not to make them prohibited. And why should we there make new edicts for which there are no need for them? And the next point is, if you think about it, there's really no limit to this. If you're going to start worrying about being a little more distant, so, be even more distant, and you'll end up sitting at home not doing anything all day long because, so that's what he says. She'ein gevul ledova haseh. V'nimsa imkein ha'adam shomeim, he'd sit like bored, sort of idle, completely, u'me'uneh, and afflicted, desolation and afflicted, depressed. V'lo min ha'olam klal, he would have absolutely zero pleasure from the world. V'chachreinu zichron l'vram omru, and Chazal tell us in Yerushalmi in Kedushin, Daled Yud Beis, she'osid adam litain din lifnei hamokum, that in the future Hashem will have to, in the future man will have to give a cheshbon, an accounting before Hashem of all the things that his eyes saw, v'lo rotze le'echol mimenu, and he did not wish to consume them. Afal pi shehaya mutalo v'hayochol, even though he could have enjoyed them. In other words, a person will have to give an accounting to Hashem in the world to come of all the things that it was possible for him to take pleasure in. And he didn't. So it seems like there's a tremendous contradiction here. Vasmahu akra And Chazal learned this idea out from a posuk in Keheles, in Ecclesiastes base 2:10. V'chol asher sha'alu einai lo atzalti mehen. This is what Shlomo HaMelech said. Anything my eyes asked, I did not keep from them. So it seems to be a contradiction here. Hatshuvahi. The answer is, ki aprishas vaday tzarech, that of course this idea of separation is certainly necessary, and mukhrach and perforce, self-evident. Vizhiru alav hachmenu zichron levrocha. And Chazal themselves also warned us about this, told us this is what we have to do in Sifra. It says, Huma shenama kadoshim to you, in Vayikra, be holy. The word holy, kadoshim, one of the ideas of kadoshim means perushim to you. Chazal understood, what does it mean to be holy? It means to be separate. Separate yourselves. Od Amrei also says in the Gemara in Tainus, Kol hayoshev b'Tainus nikra kodosh. Anybody who sits in fasting is called holy. Kal v'chomer min nozir, and we learn that as a kal v'chomer from nozir. Nozir is a Nazirite, somebody who abstains from wine and other forms of abstinence. Psikta. It says, Tzadik oichel lisoiva nafshu nafshoy. And the righteous man eats to the contentment of his soul. And what's that talking about in Mishlei? It's Chizkiyahu Melech Yehuda. That's Chizkiyahu Melech Yehuda, who, Omru Allah, they said about him, Shtei agudos shel yorok, 2 bunches of vegetables, Velitra shel bosa hayu ma'alin lefonov, b'chol yom. They used to bring him this food in front of him every day. V'ho Yisrael malagin, mal'igin. And Yisrael would scoff at him, Zeh Melech, this is a king, so little food. So again, you see, that was a king and he abstained to this great degree. Od Amro, it also says in Ksuvas, a famous Gemara, talking about Rabbeinu HaKodesh, Rebbe, says about Rebbe Sheh B'Shas Meisosoi. He, at the time of his death, Zokaf Esa Etz Boisov, he reached out his 10 fingers to heaven. Va'aman, he said, Galoi v'yodu lefonecha. It's known and revealed before you, Hashem. Shalom ne'nesi min ha'olam, that I did not have pleasure from this world, hazeh, this world, afilu be'etzba katana sheli, even as much as my little finger. Od Amru, it also says in Yalkut Shimoni, Ad she'odam mispalel al divrei Torah she'konsu b'soch me'ov. Before a man prays that Torah should enter into his innards, Yispalel al achila v'shtiya shelo yikonsu b'soch me'ov. He should daven first that food and drink should not enter into his innards. So all of these, Hein kol eila morim perush tzarech prishas. This, he brought all of these morim, these statements of Chazal, Gemaras, etc., to show the necessity of separation of prishas and its obligation. Omnam, nevertheless, tzrichim anu l'taretz mamorim hamorim hefer zeh. We have to also be able to, what's the word in English? To combine, or to, that's not the right word, but to settle how we understand this contradiction. Ach inyanhu, ki vadai chulukim rabim ve'ikarim yesh b'dova. There are many different distinctions and gradations and levels. Yesh prishus shenitz tavinu. Both there's a certain separation which we're commanded. Again, this is not for everybody. But yesh prishus whose harnu olav levilti hakoshel boy. And there's another kind, and I think I mentioned this, that we were not to fall victim to. In the words of Shlomo HaMelech, as it says in Keheles, Al tihi tzadik harbe. Don't be too big a tzadik. Now, I think we're going to have to leave it here next week, Mesillat Yesharim, we're going to discuss what is the difference and go into detail as to what is a precious, which is necessary and advisable advisable and necessary, and that preaches that separation, which is where we're saying al tihei tzaddik harbe. Don't be too much of a tzaddik. So Be'ezrat Hashem will carry on with that next week.